is somewhat overwhelming, the decision to award the Nobel Peace Prize to Dr. Mandela and myself. I regard it as recognition for the peace process in South Africa. From my side, I accept it with great humility. Also on behalf of, in a certain sense of the word, all the other leaders who are not named in this award. But it is not only Dr. Mandela and myself who work towards peace. There are other leaders too who also made great contributions over a number of years, and we think of them also at a moment like this.
So Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president and one of the most loved and revered leaders around the world. He earned even more respect when he stepped down after just one term.
Having observed the media speculation in recent weeks about my retirement and pending demise, I am even more certain you are present today for exactly that reason. But that does not in any way lessen my appreciation for your presence. On the contrary, we are very happy that old age can still inspire such undeserved attention. I observed quite a number of gloomy faces in the audience, like my friend here, Dato. But I will again have to disappoint you. I am not here to announce any fair departures. And in any case, my family and advisors have warned me not to tell my favorite story about arriving at heaven's door, knocking, providing my name, and being sent to the other place. Apparently, that story makes too many people morose. What I've come to do here this morning is to make an appeal more than an announcement. I am turning 86 in a few weeks' time, and that is a longer life than most people are granted. I have the added blessing of being in very good health, at least according to my doctors. I am confident that nobody will present here today, that nobody present here today will accuse me of selfishness if I ask to spend time while I'm still in good health with my family, my friends, and also with myself.
So that was the end in a sense, but the beginning. Mandela's rise was a dream come true for Helen Suzman, South Africa's famous parliamentarian and human rights activist. She was an MP for 36 years, sometimes the sole representative of her party, often a lone white voice speaking out against apartheid in Parliament. Well, in 1996, Suzman was at Mandela's side when he signed the new constitution. Now, neither of these leaders were active in the Jacob Zuma years of 2009 to 2017. But Madiba's friend and fellow Rivonia trialist and prisoner Ahmed Kathrada took up the baton of freedom, perhaps in 2016, the year before his own death. He wrote an open letter to President Jacob Zuma urging him to resign. Well, the ANC has ruled uninterrupted since 1994, and many of these leaders have believed wholeheartedly in its slogan, a better life for all. But if we look through their eyes, are the gains of democracy real to all South Africans today? Are we truly free? All right, let me invite my panelists to join in this discussion. We're joined by Francis and Tony from the Helen Suzman Foundation, Vern Harris from the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Nishan Bolton from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, and via Skype, David Stewart from the F.W. De Klerk Foundation. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with me.
Thank you.
It's all gentlemen. I'll be the female voice tonight. But Vern, let me start with you. If we look back, so this was 1994. We saw those cues. Just remind us how Nelson Mandela himself saw that moment. Was this all inevitable, given the shifting sands, given the sanctions from overseas, or was this peaceful transition, as many believe, a miracle in South Africa?
Well, it was a very bloody miracle. It wasn't a peaceful transition. And I think it's fair to say that for Madiba, it was just another step in a continuing journey. So a big moment, but it inaugurated the hard work of actually transforming our society. And if you look at the panel, you can see we haven't done quite well at transformation.
Yeah, we need diversity. We asked you all to send representatives. I appreciate you coming, though. Let's chat. David Stewart, from De Klerk's perspective, was this about leadership? Was he and Nelson Mandela needed at that moment in time, or if they weren't there, would other leaders have stepped in and done what was necessary, what was coming?
Now, I think that South Africa was really, really fortunate to have leaders of the caliber of Nelson Mandela and F.W. De Klerk at that time. I'm not sure other leaders from the national side would have been able to do the things that they could. And it's unfortunate that Nelson Mandela played an enormous role in preparing negotiation and reassuring all South Africans that this was the course to adopt.
David, your line isn't great. I'm going to try throw another question at you and see if we can keep you with us. And controversially, I want to bring up a cartoon that was in the Mail and Guardian yesterday. So this is something recently, and I think there's a revision underway of both leaders, Nelson Mandela, we'll discuss that, as well as F.W. De Klerk. He's recently done an interview, and he was talking about saying his hands are clean, and this cartoon representing him still standing in a pool of blood saying my hands are clean. Many people still are skeptical, still failing to understand how he could be completely innocent when he was at the top of a very dirty regime.
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay, well, look, you must understand that there were elements on all sides, on the ANC side and on the National Party side, who did not want peace. They did not want negotiation. And these groups were working actively against the president, F.W. De Klerk. So the idea that De Klerk was trying to undermine the process that he himself had started is actually nonsense. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission did everything it could to try to nail it, but they didn't. Because simply, he was motivated by a wish to solve these intractable problems that had plagued South Africa for generations.
Francis, let me come to you. So Helen Suzman was there in 1994. She was part of the IEC.
Yes.
She was there when the Constitution was signed. We know that there was a disregard for rule of law, and it seems like your foundations, the actions, we often see you as a friend of the courts in any situation where the rule of law or the Constitution is being undermined. Is that your mission in the new South Africa?
That is our mission, to make sure that those in power are always accountable. And they're accountable not only to the Helen Suzman Foundation, but to the society at large. There have been numerous instances, and it's the nature of power, perhaps, that those in power would want to short-circuit some things, processes. And we will try to make sure that where those issues arise, the rule of law is always adhered to.
And one of the questions we'll be asking tonight is, are we better off? Let me just touch quickly on some of the recent cases. So Mwebi and Jiba, those top advocates, you were involved in that case. Robert McBride, when he was set to be sacked, you were saying that a politician could not move into that space of the police, at the helm of the police watchdog. Where do you think we are in terms of our constitutional democracy? What would Helen Suzman think about today?
I think that she would be delighted at some things and disappointed at others. The fact that you have your civil society, and it's a very unruly civil society, one must be aware of that, out there campaigning for what they believe is the correct outcome for certain issues. That, I think, is very exciting, and I think Helen would have applauded civil society doing what it does do. Where I think she would have been disappointed in two areas, I think. One is our economic downturn, and this is a long time in happening. After the first 15 years of very successful growth, development, employment, over the last decade the prospects are gloomy. The tensions, the stresses, the structural problems, inequality, joblessness are here. That's the one thing that I think would have alarmed her, because she had a background in economics. She would have understood what the challenges are we face. And we must give credit here that in 1994, when our democracy came into being, the Treasury was in a dire way. There were no reserves, and we built that up astonishingly over 15 years, and we've squandered it. And I think people in South Africa are rightfully angry about this. Our biggest problems are unemployment and joblessness for young people. There are other issues as well. I'm going to say this, the quite catastrophic state of our educational system. I think that we have regressed in many ways there. And these are the things she would have been disappointed with. But I think she would have been happy about civil society. When I look at the other NGOs, such as Section 27, the work that they've done in health, equal education in education, and others, we have made progress there, but there's still big problems. And the other problem which would have, I think, disturbed her was in some ways, in many ways, but in some ways specifically, the rise of racism, what I want to call a lack of respect for the other. This is something that I know one of the Kathrada Foundation is particularly keen on, looking at the issue of race and racism here.
Well, let's pick up there with Nishan. And F.W. De Klerk also recently said South Africa is no longer a non-racial society. And I know this is important to you. You've spoken out, I think when the BLF was saying, should we care that Afrikaans kids died in that school? Likewise, when white people have used the K word, is that what your mission is now, looking at this ideal of non-racialism?
Well, we've never had a non-racial society. It's an aspiration. It's something that we need to work towards. But it's not a non-racial society that is colorblind or ignorant to the big issues of inequality and poverty and unemployment in this country. Our view of non-racialism is one that is premised on the notion of equality, and where the fault lines and divisions of society, especially across race, are overcome. And at some point where race wouldn't be the determining factor of one's life opportunities and chances in this country. But that is still a long way off, because the issues that we're grappling with have deep roots within the structures of all that makes up South Africa. So we've been very far from a non-racial country. What we do take heart is that in the last few years, we have seen a society that has become incredibly intolerant towards instances and utterances of racism. The rapid response to Katsovales and others, the public sanction, I think, has just been enormous. And we think that is a changing mindset, not yet at the level that I think we would be able to eradicate racism, but I think is a significant marker in terms of public intolerance. We do need, however, to start taking racism and tackling it at its more institutional roots, particularly within the corporate sector, within the structures of society, and that requires much, much more long-term work. So it is the core work of the foundation to work towards a non-racial society, but not one that is colorblind and not one that assumes that it's something that exists today already.
Vern, do you agree that we've never actually been a non-racial society?
Absolutely. If we define racism as an apparatus of power that oppresses black people, then I don't think we've really begun to dislodge that apparatus of power which we inherited in 1994. So the structural work remains to be done in our view.
And Nelson Mandela's view on that? I mean, he stood for non-racialism. He stood for reconciliation.
But in order for that to be a reality, there needs to be transformation. And we haven't made good enough progress. The last conversations I had with him were in 2009, 2010, and he was disappointed at our lack of progress. Wherever you look in society, I mean, if you take land, for example, he set a target in 1994 for the transfer of 30% of white-owned land to black South Africans by 2014. Well, it's 2019 and we're not even at 10% yet. So we have to move quickly now and decisively.
I'm going to get a quick response from each of you on this. Let's start with you, Nishan. Is the Rainbow Nation something to aspire towards, or should we put it aside?
No, it's something that it depends how we define it. If it's within the broad ambit of what we envisage a non-racial society to be, then and if it's the equivalent to that, yes, it's something we must aspire to. But if it's different colors operating as separate groups within society, never coming together to tackle the big issues of society together, then certainly it's not something that we need to have.
Bern?
Let's forget about the rainbow. It's not a helpful metaphor at all.
Francis?
The day we give up the aspiration for non-racialism, we will have lost one of the important markers in our own destiny as a country. We have to keep alive the idea of non-racialism. We have to work for it. We have to imagine what it will be. There has to be a set of conversations around this. But if we abandon that, then I think I'd pack up and go down to the coast and watch the sea.
David, via Skype, let's try that link again. Tell us what you think.
Well, I agree. We've got a long way to go before we achieve true non-racialism in South Africa. In fact, our intergroup debate is becoming more and more violent. It's becoming more and more divisive. We're really worried about this because we see that we are now spreading negative stereotypes of one another. Many of these stereotypes come from government. And I disagree with Vern. White people are no longer in power in this country.
All right. Unfortunately, that line is not great, but I think we got the gist of what he was saying there. Vern, I'd like to pick up on something that you started talking about. The big question is, are we better off today? Are black people better off today than they were in 1994? And I can't believe that there's still argument about this. So let me ask what you think, Francis. We had a debate on SABC last night. The Free Market Foundation said there had been huge strides in actual life measurements. Lebogang Peko, another political analyst, said actually maybe there's been a decline in lifestyle if you measure it on some scale by 12%. How do you start wading through when the data is telling different things to different people?
Okay, that's always the problem with data. That doesn't mean to say you ban data and just push the ideological line. Firstly, it's not a simple reply to a very complex question. Firstly, if one looks at life expectancy, those sorts of indicators, one looks at youngsters in school, one looks at an extraordinary building program of houses. All these indicate that South Africa over the last 25 years has begun to address quite chronic levels of inequality and poverty. But all this is taking place, especially in the current situation, of an economy beginning to contract. Our population growth rate now exceeds our economic growth rate.
So people are getting poorer essentially every day.
Every day. And we've got to fix up the macro business in terms of the macroeconomy. And I may speak out of turn here, but over the last while, Treasury was totally undermined. And Treasury has to be built again from the bottom up. And I'm very pleased that we have a finance minister who can do it. We've seen the massive pilfering of state-owned enterprises. We have to turn those enterprises around in some way. Again, we have somebody able in that position to lead that. So looking at the data, we've got to understand when we are looking at it and what are we comparing it to. And it's very difficult to say it's going to be better after 25 years or it's going to be worse.
Yeah.
I would hesitate to do that.
And very complex for voters when politicians say a
we're
lot
not
of
going to even
things
talk about
this.
party politics at the moment.
Yeah, it's so difficult for people to wade through.
Politicians as prophets. They make promises, and but I don't think we're into
Okay,
prophecy.
Talking about politicians, David, let me ask you just to clarify what F.W. De Klerk said recently. If your line is not great this time, we're going to have to let you go afterwards. But I think this is important. He said that South Africa is a more unequal society in 2019 than in 1994. Is that really the case?
This is true. It's a terrible reflection on our society that 25 years after 1990, the state that is dedicated to the idea of racial equality is less equal in terms of our Gini coefficient than we were in 1920. This is a challenge for South Africa. We need to work together to address this, to grow the economy, to create jobs, to improve our education system.
The question is, Nishan, let me pose this to you. Does democratic freedom mean a lot to people who vote thinking their lives will change, and it doesn't change? We know Freedom Day celebrations were held in Makanda today. A lot of people not getting water in their taps. Does what happened in 1994 and our freedom mean much to somebody who can't eat at the moment?
I would be very hesitant to talk about what freedom means for the wide diversity of South Africans. If you were in some rural area where the biggest issue was the lack of a bridge crossing the river, and that has been done, and that is something that has the biggest impact on your life, that becomes a significant achievement, which then goes to point to why you have, despite what might look at a national very depressing picture, at a local level, different kinds of turnouts of voters, because people vote on different sets of issues which are of importance to them. And they link that to issues of material need. But South Africans also vote on the basis of historical trends, historical patterns, historical associations, and also on the basis of hope. I think that hope in the last two elections is what disappeared enormously. My sense is that it's beginning to be a feature again, in the hope that things will be better than what they are today. But starting off from the premise that things today are certainly better than they were pre-1994. Not as good as it should have been, but there's hope that it will become better. So I think voters take into account a wide variety of things that are of different importance to people.
And it's about whether the trajectory is positive.
Yes, ultimately. It's positive and hopeful, and it's on the basis of that I think South Africans have traditionally voted on. And I think what people will take into account now is whether the kinds of parties and their platforms not only addresses the national issues, but from my observation of a lot of the local election debates that have taken place, I'm just amazed at how incredibly localized the issues are. And that becomes a big factor. And it's primarily hope about resolving some of the local things.
Why don't you
that are linked to much of the national issues. But I think it's also a call out to those in power that the local issues matter and are going to require serious attention after May the 8th.
All right, so Nelson Mandela's economic legacy, I think, has been questioned by the EFF. Let's talk about that when we come back. Please stay with me, gentlemen. Thank you, David Stewart. We may have to let you go because of the line. Francis, Vern, and Nishan, please stay with me. We'll take a short break, but let's look at what some of South Africa has been saying today on Freedom Day. What do they think about this freedom we've attained?
A day to be remembered, which makes our former president Nelson Mandela a unique person, because to understand something about him, he fought for our freedom. Although I might say I wasn't born on those specific dates or years, but due to my studies, he's quite a unique man, because right now I stand educated. The English which I portray is because of him.
I wasn't born, but I guess I arrived a bit too late. Yeah, but I've heard that's the day we gained the Independence Day here as in South Africa. It's the day that we got a recognition from other countries. It's the day that we became free from apartheid and all other stuff.
I was here in South Africa, at home in Durban, probably still young, but I know this was the best day where we gained independence, and our fellow South African citizens were able to vote.
Be ready when the future calls. To share your ideas, your talents. Celebrate moments that matter. Nurture your family and community. Passion, determination, hard work. That's what drives you. Imagine a bank that's passionate about supporting your growth, that joins you on your financial journey and is part of your future. That's Ubank, growing with you.
All right, we're looking back on 25 years of freedom and the life and times of very prominent leaders in the democratic South Africa. Just a reminder of our guests, Francis Anthony from the Helen Suzman Foundation, Vern Harris from the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Nishan Bolton from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, and on the line we have David Stewart. We're using those connections just to make it clearer. Checking you can hear me, David.
I can hear you very well.
All right, great. Let's go back to Nelson Mandela's economic legacy. When I was at Varsity already, academics like Adam Habib were saying that if you look back, Nelson Mandela actually had a lot of scope to tell companies coming in to be part of the change in South Africa, to be stronger with corporates, for example. Some looking back saying, was he too weak? Does that concern you?
Well, I think we have to be critical of especially the macroeconomic policies implemented while he was president of the country. In retrospect, I think we can say that government could have done a lot better in terms of redistribution of wealth and beginning to restructure the economy fundamentally to address the challenges that were inherited in 1994. I mean, I think I would go as far as to say we embraced neoliberalism with unseemly haste.
So was Nelson Mandela soft on white people? Thomas Piketty, the French economist, came and said he's never seen anything like it. In most countries you have that 1% and then you've got the 99. Here there's the strata, maybe a 10% at the top. White South Africans still dominating emphatically economically.
No doubt about that. I would not put all the blame on Madiba, however, because many instruments were put in place for redistribution, for restitution, reparation, and so on. We can even talk about prosecutions of those who failed to get amnesty, but we didn't follow through on any of those. Well, we've tried in some areas, but we failed dismally overall.
And I think Madiba himself said freedom comes along with things like emancipation for women and education, and there, like Francis was saying earlier, the track record makes you want to cry sometimes.
Well, as you can see again, patriarchy is still a major challenge for us. But I think it's important to say that whether we're talking about patriarchy or the economy, we need to see our challenges in a global context. Is that we see these challenges in many countries, and we're part of that global economy.
Nishan, is South Africa today a better place than it was?
Far better place.
Despite all the economic challenges, despite unemployment, despite inequality.
Ahmed Kathrada used to always say, take a long-term view. Don't take 20 years or 25 years of democracy as being something that is hugely enormous. It's long in the lifetime of a human being, but in the lifetime of a nation, it's very marginal. And I think one of the problems was the enormity of the challenge, the intention to want to address almost everything at one go, which certainly meant that with the resources available, it was never going to be done on the scale that was anticipated. Neville Alexander once said to me, he thought our biggest mistake was that we were not upfront with people in terms of the time that it was going to take to address many of the challenges that the country faced. So he said, for example, had we said to people that education will take you up to 50 years to actually start to meaningfully address, then we would have had an honest conversation from 1994. And I think that perhaps was one of our earliest mistakes, was not to have been upfront about the scale of the challenge and what it was going to take to address it, and what the roles and responsibilities of all of the different constituents in this country were going to have to do to achieve those goals. I think the closest I've seen to this kind of approach is when Amos Masondo was mayor of Johannesburg. In his 5-year term, he simply said, my focus is going to be on Soweto, and we are going to put in the resources required to upgrade Soweto so that it looks like as close to many of the other suburbs. And he took that hard decision, and today you can see a slightly different quality of life in that area. Now, we didn't do that in many other parts of the country. And that's partly because decision-making, I think, has been weak, has not been focused, and sometimes has been too grand in terms of ambition.
I'd like to ask both of you, do you think land restitution could have been done? The serious claims from people who lost their land because of the apartheid government, do you think that could not have been done in 25 years? Vern?
Well, I think we made a good start with land restitution, but we've run into grave problems there. But alongside that is the land reform program, which is different from restitution, and those two need to work hand in hand. And we've really failed South Africans on this one.
Do you agree, Francis?
Absolutely. I think Vern is correct in distinguishing between restitution and reform. In the case of restitution,
I'm using restitution because it's easy. Should we have been able to do that in 25 years?
we should have. We should have done it far better than we have. There were delays. We're not quite sure quite how and why. We can see where the pressures have built up so that we come to this situation now 25 years on, and in the new parliament, there's going to be an attempt to change the constitution, section 25, around this issue, which is utterly and totally unnecessary, because the instruments already exist. And this is where the politics of the moment, and in a sense it's a populist politics, could derail our policy approach to land. We've had the means for 25 years to do it. But we know that there were huge problems in the bureaucracy and also corruption, because one of the things which we have to also reconcile ourselves with over the last 25 years, but chronically over the last 10 years, is how corruption has poisoned our body politic.
David, the F.W. De Klerk Foundation, I also think, says the Constitution doesn't need to be changed. You don't support expropriation of land without compensation, but you also say there's no reason to believe it will happen outside the law. Can this be handled well going forward?
Yes, I think it can, but once again, we've got to work together. Organized agriculture has made very constructive proposals about how we can go about land reform. We'd like to see a land reform process that ends with people, with many black farmers owning their own land. We'd like to see it going into the cities. We'd like to see the 7.5 million black homeowners getting title deeds for those homes. That is 1.5 trillion rand that is locked up. So we support land reform, but it must be done in a way that will ensure that we continue to produce food, that will be just and fair to everybody, and that is based on cooperation. And it's not necessary to change the Constitution to do this.
All right, David, your line is bad again. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to let you go and wrap up the discussion with the three gentlemen in studio. We are getting to the end. So let's fly through some of the milestones. The TRC, Francis. Yes. Does too much suspicion and questions remain after that process?
In itself, it was greeted, its initiation was greeted with some degree of controversy. I think it was very important that we went through it, that we opened up some of the issues, the darker secrets. There were positive things that came out of the TRC. We must never underestimate this. I remember at Sussex University being part of a discussion group about the TRC, and I, at that stage, was working for one of the commercial banks and was part of the banking delegation. And I spoke about business and the TRC. And at Sussex, I had a field day defending that position. And one of the most wonderful moments was when Eddie Daniels, who had been on the island with Madiba and Ahmed Kathrada, came to my defense and said, "You don't know what this has meant for us, those people who had been on the island for decades." Because things were opened up, and I could have wished for no better support than from Eddie Daniels. So there was that which I think was necessary. All human endeavours are in a sense thwarted by our own problems as human beings. But we started something. There were also very important consequences for the TRC, and this was initiated in the particular bank. It went to the South Africa Foundation, and in the first year, in terms of getting business to come to the party, we raised 1 billion rands, which was directed at human capital development, and the second year, also 1 billion rands. Now, those were positive consequences of the TRC process, of opening up the past, of getting business on board, and I think those things should be celebrated. Who today remembers the Business Trust?
Yeah.
And I think we've got very short memories in this country.
Let me get Vern's view. Is the glass half empty or half full when it comes to the TRC, what was achieved?
Well, I think it provided a springboard for continuing work. And in terms of being a springboard. It still bears up pretty well to analysis. But the problem has been that we have not implemented its recommendations. In fact, the state, South African state, has never formally responded to its recommendations. And if you look at them, they constituted, in my view, an agenda for transformation in the late 90s. So you don't take those recommendations seriously, and the transformation project kind of runs into the sand.
Okay, I'm going to have to fast forward because we're coming to the end of the discussion. But Ahmed Kathrada, we said in the introduction, wrote that open letter, very unusually for him, I think 2016, asking President Jacob Zuma to resign. How pivotal was that for him? Looking back, does your foundation believe the Zuma years were the lost years, as some commentators say?
Absolutely. I think if you look at the extent of the rot and how that has seeped into the lowest level of government in this country, this is now an epidemic. Much of it stems and was refined in those 10 years. It has now extended beyond just national government and parastatals. And I think we have lost significant ground in those 10 years. There would be a number of indicators that people can talk to show how things have regressed in these 10 years.
All right, we've come to the end. Maybe just each of you give me a parting thought as we head to the polls. You don't have to tell me who you think South Africans should vote for. In some respects, the ANC has been incredibly strong with the death penalty. I think with bringing in quotas for women. Do you believe a strong party is good for us going forward, or do we need more opposition? Give me some hints, starting with you.
That's a leading question. You're asking us how we're going to vote. I wanted to say something good. We've got 25 years into our democracy. I take what Shan says about it's a short time, but we've made it up to here. I can remember the bad 80s as you came, especially in what was then Natal, and how horrible it was. And I remember thinking, can we ever get away from this? Can we get beyond it? And we did get beyond it. This doesn't mean to say that our challenges disappeared. There are new challenges and there are still old challenges. But I think today is a celebration. 25 years old, this is fantastic. We've got to get to the next 25 years. And then I think we're out of business.
Well, I take Sean's point around corruption, but I would say it's not just located in the state, not only in the private sector. I would say that our society has become deeply corrupted. So that voting, for me, is one element of democracy, but I think we must all take responsibility, civic responsibility, for cleaning up our act and transforming our society.
Final word goes to you, Nisha.
I wish that we will get a parliament that has a different level of different quality of representatives with a better degree of integrity. And I know that's not going to be the case, which certainly means we are going to have to do much, much more work to be more vigilant on those issues, which I think will arise. But this time we need to be much more forceful as society to start rooting it out from May the 9th already.
All right, thank you. This has been a great discussion. Thank you all, gentlemen. Francis Anthony, Helen Suzman Foundation, Vern Harris, Nelson Mandela Foundation, Nishan Bolton from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation.
Thank you.
And we take a short break. I'll be back with more news of the day. Stay with us on Full View.
SABC News is producing more than 150 election-related programs ahead of the May 8th election. If you think our content is not in line with our editorial policy, direct your complaints in writing to complaints@sabc.co.za. Complaints on election-related broadcast content should also be lodged with ICASA's Complaints and Compliance Committee by sending an email to bmashihu@icasa.org.za or call 012-568-3233.